Hey everyone, this is creepingnet talking about making synthesizer patches using Line6 HD500. The reason why I haven't done an introductory video or any of this to this yet is I'm still getting my rig worked out on how we're going to shoot these kinds of videos. So my rig right now, what we're using, I'm in Linux Mint, running Oracle Virtualbox in Windows XP here. That's all you're seeing right now. I'm seeing the OBS window with XP in it. We're using, of course, my personal Pod HD500, which I just replaced the USB port in, so it is less spotty with all that stuff. And we're going to kind of, let's just get this party started by talking about, first off, kind of why one would want to do this. Because a lot of fuddy-duddies, dad rocker types, the ones, the traditionalists, because guitarists can be really traditional, let's just face it. Typically, they're like, oh, well, why don't you go get a synthesizer? Why don't you buy a keyboard then? If you want your guitar to sound like a keyboard, it's a guitar, not a keyboard. I'm here to kind of tell you the science behind this. The real, true, cold, hard science that I don't think anybody who is closed-minded is going to ever accept. And that's that an electric guitar, what you're hearing, while it is affected by the materials on the guitar, the 90, at least 95, maybe 75 at the least of the sound is just electric current. And that's how synthesizers work. That's how electric guitars work. That's even how your electric drum kit works. And that's even how you're hearing this audio from your computer. It's all just electrical impulses. And it's just they're delivered at higher and higher frequencies every year. And the technology gets better and better. And we're able to reproduce sounds that with a electric guitar or even a synthesizer that we weren't able to do before in a previous generation. So I always kind of saw it as, being able to do both with a guitar is a real plus. Now that said, I am aware that synthesis, guitar, and guitar synthesis, all three of those things have been around for an extremely long time. Electric guitar has been a solid body in particular, has been around since, like 1949. Synthesizers have been around since the 40s, 50s, or even 60s. There were some early attempts, I think, in the 50s, if I'm not mistaken. And then you had guitar. Then you had guitar synthesis started in the late 70s. The earliest guitar synths were basically monophonic solutions, meaning you could only play one note at a time, and it was basically plugging into a regular keyboard synth via the voltage-controlled oscillator with the guitar. Because a guitar produces voltage, and it took the frequency of that voltage, read it as a pitch, and then played it back using the synthesizer's synth circuit. Then came, so that was a monophonic synth guitar. That's been around since the 70s. That's mainly what we're going to be talking about here. Polyphonic stuff is kind of, it needs to mature a bit more. I think with Bluetooth and other things moving forward, we may eventually see the unaltered thing. We already kind of see it with those Boss pedals that have, the samplers in them. But I'm going to kind of talk about different ways of getting synthy sounds out of your guitar. We're going to start with the synth effects on here that I use for a lot of the synth stuff, but we're also going to do some stuff that doesn't involve a synth at all, creative uses of effects. So to talk about the early synths, so you kind of understand where we're coming from, there were some early synth guitar players. In particular, there was Elliot Easton of the Cars. He used a Roland GR303 and a Roland GR707. You can actually see him playing the 707 at the Live Aid in 1985 on Heartbeat City, or the title track from their album at the time. And another one, Andy Summers of the Police. You can hear him using the Roland GR303 in the middle breakdown of Don't Stand So Close to Me. That's not a guitar. That's not an overdubbed synthesizer, and that is not Sting's Taurus pedals that he was using with his feet, just like Geddy Lee of Rush did. This is an actual guitar synthesizer device. These early devices were really ungangly, really unwieldy. They required extra equipment that the guitar player had to bring on stage, more than was practical for some of them, even with the big racks of the 80s, so they never really took off. And worst of all, you had to find a guitar in your collection you didn't like enough to go hack out a big hole in it for a hexaphonic pickup with a pickup for each string, which is the best place to start explaining how the Line 6 works. Now we're going to use, as a quick rundown in the software if you haven't used this before. Over here you have your main presets. This is used for syncing your settings with your pedal or vice versa. And then over here is your signal chain window, which right now we're in one of my synth settings right now. And then you have your little tabs here for, effects, amplifiers, mixers, controllers, set lists. And I must mention the mixer control. As you can see here, they had a special setting for Variax. I think Variax has had a hexaphonic type system on them, and you could actually use this pedal in a 6-string polyphony mode, or I don't know if they made 7 strings, but I know they made 6 strings. And you could actually do your sound polyphonic synths if you have a Line 6 Variax guitar. I don't have one, so, what I'm using today is my 1985 Kramer Focus 3000 with a sustainer pickup in it, because I find sustainers really handy when doing these synth effects, especially when you want it not to sound like a guitar, but sound like a synthesizer. Now I'm going to use my old school myself patches thing to kind of demonstrate the different synths, and talk about them, and then talk about ways you can use other effects for synths, which I've been doing since I was in the band Lithium in 2001. We had a song called Crystal that had me doing a synth pad, and I didn't use a synth pedal for that at all. And so we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit. So right here we got a nice clean, brand new crystal clean patch. This is pretty much the standard for Line 6. You got 4 pre-amplifier effects, 4 post-amplifier effects, all controllable by the foot switch and pedal board mode. And then you have your amplifier over here, which you can double click on and set. We're not going to play with that right now. Now I'm going to give you some tips also on making these patches too, because I've been doing it for a while and I kind of know my things. Usually the first thing I like to use is some kind of compressor, because the regular electric guitar, one of the beautiful things about it as itself is it is a very dynamic instrument. It is very dynamic. You can pick lightly, you can pick really lightly, or you can pick really dig in. So you can kind of jump in on it. My playing might be a little spotty on this video too, because there's an audio delay because of the hackneyed way I had to set all this up so you could actually hear the audio. Now the first thing I'm going to do is make sure I am on the bridge pickup. That's another thing I want to mention about synth patches with guitars, especially on this. It doesn't matter which pickups you have on. This is actually very convenient, because this means you can switch to the synthesizer and then back to the guitar, and you don't have to change pickups. One of the main things with a lot of analog type guitar synth things like those Parasite Studios makes with CMOS chips and stuff is they tend to run best in the neck position. This being a digital approximation tends to do better just running with any pickup, and you get a consistent sound regardless. We'll demonstrate that in a minute. Now, when I start building these effects, I usually like to place my synthesizer either in position 2 or 3, depending on how many devices I have behind it. Position 2, sometimes I use a pitch shifter before it to add extra, fifths, or maybe an intelligent pitch shifter, so we're feeding data to the pedal that it understands. However, it's usually best practice to do it afterwards, so I might want to just use number 2 for the synthesizer and put the compressor beforehand. So let's talk about the compressor for a minute. So compressors, of course, are under dynamics, the very first category, and we're just going to use, instead of a noise gate, we're going to use a tube compressor right here. So we have, our regular tube compressor. It's a little bit there, so we're going to turn the threshold up a little bit so it's a little less as gainy. And of course, my pickup's a little distorted. This Kramer has a Seymour Duncan detonator 17.5k ohm humbucker in there. I'm using that so I can use my sustainer system on it. So let's go to number 2 and let's demo some synths. And here they're under filters. You go under filter, you drag all the way down here, and there are 5 synthesizers on here. You have Octasynth, Synthomatic, attack synth, synth string, and growler. Octasynth, I'm going to kind of demo it beforehand because we're doing this completely unscripted. This took me about 100 takes. Anyway, if you listen to that, it sounds like a Sound Blaster card almost, kind of like the beginning of... some guitarists say, oh, it sounds like ass. No, it just sounds like a frequency modulator synth, like a Yamaha YM262, like you'd find an Adlib card or a Sound Blaster card found in like an old 386, 486 computer running MS-DOS from the late 80s, early 90s. Another thing you guys should know that I'm pretty well interested in. So, you know, I'm sure you probably even recognize these kind of sounds from things like, you know, Duke Nukem or... And of course, the controls that you have tempo sync. I never use that, so none of mine are tempo synced. I like to have that fluidness to do. But let's see what it does here. Doesn't really do much. So speed, if we turn speed all the way down, see it oscillates a little more. It sort of morphs. But then if we turn it all the way up, it changes a lot quicker. Frequency, of course. You can turn it all the way down, it sounds more like a guitar. You know, I don't know, this would be a good one to play that. Sounds kind of like the Sound Blaster stuff that you'd hear, you know, Duke Nukem or Doom, you know. So that's kind of what that does. Frequency does this. That kind of makes weird spacey noises. And these tend to work best if you just learn how to pick and play them right. Like I'm going to show you if we play a chord. Chords actually kind of work with this. It also kind of sounds like a ring mod, which would be cool, you know, use on like Paranoid. That kind of thing. So you got your Q control, which usually when you see a Q control, it works like a wah-wah pedal, as you can see. You got depth. There you go. You can play with that and make your neighbors think the UFOs are landing in your backyard. You roll back to mix control. You can mix the electric guitar with it, you know. Sounds a little bit like the old 70s Canadian band Space Opera, honestly. And that was kind of a good demonstration to kind of mention. So really, guitars were kind of capable of synth sound since the 60s because of fuzz pedals. Because fuzz pedals are really nothing more than really, really, really gainy transistor overdrive devices. And what they do is they create a square wave signal of your guitar's signal that's very distorted. And if you've listened to some of my demos of like my homemade fuzz pedals, you'll notice that I really tend to veer towards a very synthesizer kind of sound with them, where it's very almost 8-bit Nintendo-like. So now we're on the Synthomatic. This is probably one of the ones I use a lot, and you have multiple waves. On synthesizers, waveform is basically indicates the shape of the waveform that you would see on like an oscilloscope if you were studying the audio through an oscilloscope. So like a square wave would be a square wave. You'd see these little sort of top hat looking shapes. Saw wave looks like teeth on a saw blade. Sine wave is just an up and down warbly. You can kind of, if you listen to them, these are the looks. So this first one we have here, oscillator 1, is kind of a basic saw wave. For frequency on this, if we hit frequency, as you can see, it controls controls a little bit of how it behaves. It adds a secondary frequency to it. Sounds kind of like an organ. That kind of thing. Q, of course, works like I said. If you turn it all the way up, you get more sharper. And if you turn it back, it sounds more thicker and warmer. This is another piece of synthesizer editing that I can give you a nugget of wisdom. Is when you're working with certain synth sounds, certain ones tend to like certain Q or resonant frequencies more than others. Like this one really veers towards the bass. You see how weak it gets when I turn it all the way up like that? And that's not useless, it's just might not be the effect you want. Another thing you have here is pitch. Pitch controls how the pitch of the synth. So there we are, we're at the normal guitar octave, you know. Actually, this one's actually an octave down. Now we're in the guitar's range. This would be a good one to use with the sustainer, you know. And that's another thing about using sustainers with these. If you let the note ring out long enough, once it will start to decay to a certain point, and if it's not being held steady enough by the threshold, it'll jump up an octave, which it hasn't yet, because I hit that note pretty hard. You use the vibrato bar. And some of these will dart up, on some of them they won't. So that was Square Wave 1, kind of a plain saw wave, kind of a pulse slash sine wave sort of thing. Wave number 2. This is another sound blastery sounding thing, you know, if you've ever played an old Yamaha Porta-Sound keyboard from the 80s. Which this one has the chord problem right here. I'm playing a D power chord. But if I play the D note by itself, that's what I get. Kind of sounds like my Casio DG10 almost. If we turn the frequency down, warms it up. Q gives us more of the high, more of that painful, pokey kind of thing. Pitch. Yeah, see, that kind of sounds like on when I'm working in Voyetra Sequencer Pro on my 486 and I hit pause. So yeah, you can get kind of a sound blaster sound out of Wave 2. Wave 3. Yeah, sort of a trumpety type sound. Turn on that sustainer. So I'm basically like emulating my Casio almost there with this. If we move over to number 4, this is more of a some of them crash if you go too high. Like this is a really bass. This one kind of sounds like Greg Hawkes almost. Yeah, sort of the end of Danger, the synth solo from Dangerous Type. So that's what that's good for. If we want to go up to number 5 here, you have kind of a buzzy sort of thing. you know. Yeah, so sort of a synthy sounding thing there. Another one up, you have number 8. Sort of froggy sounding thing. That was number 6, now number 7. So there you go. Let's move down to another one, number 8. And that's another thing about playing these. You need to learn how to pick well, you know, very cleanly. I suggest kind of practicing picking up your fingers off the notes when you're not playing them. That way then, you know, because if you play this sloppy like you would a normal chord, you know, you get weird noises like that. But if you play, you know, like this arpeggiated sus2, you know, so playing synth guitar on a guitar actually is a really good way to kind of improve your left and right hand synchronization with your playing. Now we're going to move up to the next one, Attack Synth. This one sounds kind of like a sound you'd maybe heard like used as an effect on certain things. So you can bring it up in pitch. Or all the way up. If we bring frequency down, it fades in slowly. And if we bring it up, so you have, you know, so yeah, I could play synthy stuff on this all the time. That's a really good kind of quasi-saw thing like you'd use back in the 80s. You can also change the wave to P-DUT pulse width modulation. As you can see, actually that was a thing. We were on a ramp wave here. Here we're on pulse width modulation, which sounds kind of like some of... Yeah, sounds like a Game Boy. And then Square. And this is the one I use to make my guitar sound like a Nintendo. Seriously, because the 8-bit NES video game hardware, and also this works for Atari 2600 type noises too, the basis sound of most synth sounds is a square wave. And the Atari 2600 and NES both use square waves for a lot of their primary purposes. I mean, it'll sound familiar to you here. You know, have you ever played Donkey Kong? Yeah, so you'd have that, you know. Yeah, all those kind of synthy square wavy sounds, you know. So, you know, that kind of synthy, square wavy thing. And of course, chords don't work here. You can use it with the synth sustainers and stuff like that to do that. See, that sounds very much like a synthy thing. You make your guitar sound like the Atari 2600 ET game. All right. Anyway, we're gonna jump over now to the synth string synthesizers. Were very popular in the 70s. They were used a lot for a lot of sort of the background on a lot of songs towards the end of the 70s and into the early 80s. A lot of times paired up with a phase shifter. So like say, let's maybe take a post effect here and we'll put a... And on this one, before we do that, let's go ahead and do the speed. So you can see that's almost like a... The attack, we can turn the attack down, make it almost instant. Yeah, kind of like another Atari type sound, actually. You know, like a haunted house. And that's something you can't do easily on a synthesizer. That guitar allows you to do all that crazy string bending I just did. Well, you could do it with a pitch bend wheel. But yeah, the frequency sort of controls how high up it is. The attack. This is also good for, you probably heard this one. So yeah, you can do your soulish sort of synthy sounds on there, like the Gap Band works on that pretty darn well. We're gonna move on down to the Growler synth. This is the one I call the foreigner synthesizer for obvious reasons. You know, cold as ice. I also sometimes call it Wowzer synth. You can change where it is. So right now I'm playing with the sustainer. So you get kind of a cool sort of swelling thing. You can bring the pitch up, you can mix it with the guitar, you know. It's also kind of similar to something that, you know, like Ben Orr used on Moving in Stereo. Except an octave down. So that's pretty much all your basic synthesizer kind of sounds that you can get with a basic synth. We'll kind of go over some of the other ones later on. Now I'm going to kind of talk about other things that you can do to get kind of synthy patch sort of thing, and one of the rudimentary ones I've done. We're just going to do the basic version because I've added a bunch of stuff to this sound. So way back, about 2001, I was in a band called Lithium. We did a song called Crystal, and there was a patch that I used on there. We did never use synthesizers in Lithium, ever. There was no synthesizers. And what I did was I did this to my guitar signal, basically. So I turned that way up, and then we'll drag that right in front of here. And you want as clean of a signal before you do this as anything. So what we'll do is we'll take this dynamics and we'll put a noise gate in front of it. And then we'll put this on the neck pickup. Bring it just slightly driving. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to take a reverb at the end. And then we're going to take that plate reverb. We're going to turn this all the way up. Turn the mix down. We're going to try to create something kind of like that. So the way to explain how these effects work, we use a noise gate to get a really, really clean kind of guitar signal going in. Then we use a compressor to punch it up. And then we use another setting here. Let's just go back to it. Because I'd rather not rebuild the whole freaking presets that I'm doing. Another type of synthy sound I get is just using conventional guitar effects. So right here we have the Crystal Voice, the modern version. And how it sounds is like this. If I turn both pickups on, you have a... And how I'm getting that sound is basically I am overdriving a plate reverb with a delay of some kind, usually set to full spread, full offset, mix almost all the way up, and I want the repeats just back down. On the original ME6, the way I did it, I ran it all the way up to full repeat on the feedback control and then backed it down just one notch so that it would stay ringing. So then, after you turn it up, you have all this. And that is why you don't... Sheesh. And that is why you do not turn on your Sustainiac with your neck pickup on. Yeah. And then probably, I haven't even tried this with the Sustainiac yet, so let's try it out and see what it does. It sounds like sort of a cricket-filled night now. I'm using my tone control like a volume control with the Sustainer. Now I'm getting like violin sound. You can hear the delay in that. Vibrate it and warble it, make it creepy, Do all kinds of cool stuff with that sound. Another sound that I did not using a synthesizer in the past is this one for a track that probably is a little lesser known of theirs. It's called Least Ignored. Let's turn this back up on here. We need to turn it down. To explain how those kinds of sounds work, I'm using a delay pedal that I actually turned the rate all the way down on. So if you look at this, the delay time on this is the feedback's all the way up at 99, but the time is set all the way down to 20 millisecond. So normally, by the time you get up to about 100, 200 milliseconds, you start to get an actual delay pedal. And you can hear how that pitch, how it's now becoming a pitch that matches another pitch on the guitar. So in this case, we have it at a B, which was, you know, what I had on there. And then I added some reverb and some delay. You can even add a pitch shifter to it, even if you want to. I mean, I'm adding all kinds of new stuff to these old. Just makes it sound bigger. So there's some of the sounds. Again, Wowzer synth. There's another synthesizer. Here's a synth sound that actually uses a synth. Kind of show you some of that. This one was actually one of the defaults on the Line 6. I didn't even create this one, but as you can see, we've got the main operative is this synthesizer. Without it, you just have the delay. So, you know. You can see me milking that sustainer for everything it's worth. And there it goes. You know, it jumps up an octave once you start to get enough of a decay. So that's kind of the thing that we do with that. Big fifth synth. That's another thing I use a lot. I'm using the Synthomatic on this one with pitch glide to get kind of a really pretty sound, you know. And then we get to the NES guitar square wave here. This sounds kind of like a Nintendo, you know. Kind of reminds me of the music from Tetris Type 3 for the NES. Or, you know, that part, that synth guitar part, actually Steve Stevens played on Rebel Yell, you know. Yeah, you probably recognize that part. So yeah, you got that part. Moon Rocks was another one I kind of took from the default patches and used. This is actually, no, this is one I created. So this is another kind of synthy sounding thing based on something I already had. I used to have, well, actually I still have it, but I don't use it much. Maybe I'll combine it with this. We'll see. I had this effects processor called a Behringer Virtualizer Pro 2024P, and what it was it had a stereo pitch shifter on it, and it allowed me to get this, you know. And it's in stereo. This doesn't sound nearly as good as that one does. But yeah, that's another effects thing I could probably do. I need to just hit escape here because it's trying to freaking drag my patch over. Haunting an analog. What is this? Oh yeah, this is like a creepy analog synthesizer sound I came up with. It basically, a lot of old analog synthesizers used to have pitch drift, kind of like this. You even hear this on a few songs, you know. Like one example is kind of warbling pitch thing you used to hear a lot in the 80s. Sometimes it was chorus pedals, sometimes it was the actual synthesizers pitch drifting, but it'd be like... You know, lady of the 80s. If we did like Loverboy in a horror movie. Anyway. This is another one exploiting glitches and the delay effects. The way this one kind of works is I have my foot switch set to the delay time, so I can go using the multi-headed delay, and I can kind of and I'm just rocking the foot switch back and forth to make it do that stuff. This is a way of creating sonic chaos. It's always fun. I'm using a multi-headed delay, and I'm using a particle verb to kind of interact with each other, so then they do that. There's another example of a patch where I'm not using a synthesizer. I'm just using a guitar to make synthy noises. I did add an attack synth to it as an option, but it's not the primary part of the sound. Another one, here's one of the built-in ones, the Year of John Lord. Yeah, if you know who John Lord is, he was like the keyboardist for Deep Purple, among other things. And this one uses the Wave 1 from the Synthomatic, which, as I said, sounds like an organ, so that's what it's used for. You can even get, like, use it with the Sustainer to do that. Haunted Nintendo should be obvious. And I just dropped my pick. What are you doing? It's another creepy one. This is another fun one, you know. Which, looking at this is another one that doesn't use a synthesizer. It uses smart harmony. Well, no, it does. It's using a slow filter. And the filter, and we can kind of, use that to our advantage to make like a what they call a synth pad. And that's probably the next thing I'm going to kind of talk about in this whole synthesizer monkey business is basically, pads and stuff. So like a pad is like a synth patch that kind of rides in the underside of stuff. If you listen to old Loverboy stuff, Doug Johnson has like a square wave synthesizer kind of running underneath that's kind of chorused and reverbed. That's a synth pad. If you ever heard Lust for Kicks by the Cars, there's sort of a little sort of pretty sounding synthesizer that just plays the same note for like measures at a time underneath. And that's what a synth pad is. Drive's a ton of synth pads so put together. So that's kind of the use of these. Another sort of organ sounding thing. This one I created, I'm still working on, called Super Guitar-y. Here's a 70s string synth kind of sound like I was telling you about from like the 70s. You had the or early 80s. There you go, we can kind of control it with the Sustainiac. sure you heard that kind of stuff in like 80s movies and stuff like that. Siphon squares. It's going to be another square wave patch. Yeah, now this sounds a lot like the Steve Stevens thing that I was showing earlier. It's kind of like a version of the crystal patch intended for... It also kind of sounds like the synths the Talking Heads used at the beginning of Burning Down the House. Pitch slap, that's not in... Yeah, that's another one of my chaos effects that came with the pedal that I like. Here's another one. Doing, we're in the Haunted Mansion from Disney right now. Playing this all on the fretboard without a pick, with the Sustainiac on the low E string. And that's when the demons come. So, kind of showing you all the different sounds that you can make with this stuff, you know. We got Namaste. Sort of like fluttery, you know. It's more of like kind of post-punk guitar kind of sound, but it has an oscillating synth in the back, which you could probably hear if I pick it and put the sustainer on. You can kind of hear that oscillating kind of synth in the background that makes it sound just a little otherworldly. I mean, there's a whole lot you can do with this, and you just gotta use your imagination, really, and play around with the presets. You know, I got a Getendo one over here, too, you know. Which actually, this part was taken from the Ultima game, the Ultima Exodus game. You know, there's a part where you're in the castle where the snake is, you know. So yeah, I can play that, and you can turn effects off. So so now we have a straight up sort of thing, you know, like Dragon Wagger. You can play Dragon Warrior on there, you know. If we go back here, it's sort of a ritual one. Sound a sort of voodoo-y sounding thing. And here we're using, as you can see, multiple pitch shifters, multiple delays, and a stereo configuration up here to create a different effect in each ear. So if you're listening to this on headphones, congrats, you're getting the best experience. Filter trim. So, fun story. This filter trim thing is actually a more musicalized version of an old patch I used to have back in the Lithium days called Kick R2D2. Because it sounded, you know, it uses what's called a random step filter. U2 used this on a lot of stuff back in like the early 90s, if I recall. And alter the speed. And change all the steps around and make them sound crazy. And it makes it sound like a computer going through a garbage disposal. Okay. And then let's go over to another one here. Oh yeah, I was talking about the C3PO one. No, this is B3PO, so this is the organ one. Sounds like a cheap marriage chapel in like Las Vegas or something. Slow drift in E. As you can see, another patch that sounds synthy, and there's no synthesizer effects on it. You can do a lot of stuff with delay and modulation effects. Ghost of the 80s. And do all this. Sometimes, as you can see here, the sustainer is a little much for it. And again, another one that's not using a synthesizer. As you can see, we're using a pitch shifter, pitch vibrato, cave reverb, and we got, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with this. And we move up here. I even have patches for bass, which I will kind of show you too. You can do stuff with bass with this. So getting back to it, now we're going to go ahead and talk about using a bass guitar with this, because I have some bass patches that use a bass guitar. Right here's one. It's one that I use for like the DX3 experimental cyberpunk project thing I've been doing on BandLab, where we have a bass paired up with a square wave with the because the whole point in that band idea I have is basically your bass guitar is both the rhythm guitar and the bass, and then your lead guitar is both also a rhythm guitar and a lead guitar, and they can play off of each other. So this is just, playing a regular bass line on a bass 6 with this patch, Axe Blaster 16 sounds like a Sound Blaster, we maybe play like the I don't know, this is a bass line from like an old DOS game. Yeah, they're both from the same game. Test Drive 3, Seeing here, I use it, but I used it. You hear the synth sounds the same, but the bass guitar sounds different every time. Here we do another thing. This isn't really a synth, but I can also emulate Tom Peterson from Cheap Trick with his 12-string bass. Let's turn it down. Yeah. But then we have this kind of stuff, Poly 6. Let's turn this one on. Come on. There you go. Then we have a Squier and bass, another kind of square wave and bass guitar thing. Sounds kind of like the old. That kind of thing. Sort of a gothic 16 string where I took the Tom Peterson thing one step forward. There's BandLab Ness. And then we have another version of that kind of least ignored thing here, you know. So you can do a lot of stuff with this stuff. I mean, we can even play all the other patches with it. You know, we got the big string synth here. It sounds kind of... Got this one, you know. And kind of go to mini chord. You know, a whole bunch of effects to it. And hopefully that's been kind of a good help to let you know kind of how you can make synthesizer patches on your guitar using the Line 6. Again, I'm kind of showing you these because some of these patches can take a really, really long time to create for some people. What really helps is having an understanding of how guitar effects work, how audio production works is kind of a really good help. Understanding, you know, your signal chain, how one effect can affect to another, which one should go in front or after a previous one, that kind of thing. And it can change rapidly. I mean, from effect to effect, you might want, you might want something different from me. I like a lot of 80s synth pads and string synths and a lot of really, really kind of pretty sounding stuff. So that's kind of why I developed things the way I did. Something entirely different than what we might talk about in another video, which is programming patches for like a Casio digital guitar or a synthesizer on this thing. We'll talk about that later on another project, on another video. Anyway, this one's gone on for pretty long, I must say, but there's a lot to say and a lot to show on it. So hopefully this is going to be helpful for somebody, you know. And yeah. It's creepingnet signing out. I'll see you in the next video.